Good morning to all of you joining us in the room or online. We are going to wait a couple more minutes for people to come in and then we'll start. Thank you. Okay, let's start. So welcome everyone to this MPC seminar. My name is Eleonora Milazzo. I'm a research fellow at the Migration Policy Center, and I'm very pleased to welcome Federico Russo, who is an associate professor of political science at the University of Salento. His research focuses on legislative studies, Italian politics, and European integration, and today, he's going to present his new work on migrant advocacy in Brussels, the role of members of the European Parliament with migratory backgrounds. So welcome, Federico. Thanks a lot for being with us. Before we start, just some short housekeeping. So Federico is going to speak for about 25 minutes, after which we're going to have a Q&A. So if you're joining us on Zoom, please write your question in the Q&A box. You can do so also during the presentation, or you can raise your hand and I will call you when the time comes. So thanks again, Federico, for joining us today. You have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here presenting this new research. I thank Professor Geddes for this opportunity and all the staff at the Migration Policy Center. As Eleonora just described, I'm mainly a specialist in legislative studies and parliamentary politics in general. I've always had also a personal, non-academic interest in migration, and this is the first opportunity for me to bring these two threads together. So it's a really early draft, the one I'm presenting today, and I would like very much to receive feedback and comments. It is the most appropriate moment to influence the course of my research. So thank you for being here. Well, in this presentation, I will try to understand whether and to what extent the descriptive representation of people with a migratory background in the European Parliament enhance the substantive representation of migrants in Europe. So I'll try to describe why this topic is important and how the data and methods through which I'm trying to shed some lights on this problem. Well, let's start from the theory, I would say. Migration is a theoretical challenge for representative democracy. In the last couple of years, of decades perhaps, democracy has been defined not as a set of institutional mechanisms, but as a normative principle. And the kind of normative principle which is most important for democracy has come to be known as the all-affected principle. According to the all-affected principle, all those who are affected by a collective decision should be included in the decision-making process, should have a say. On the other hand, the way in which representative democracy has been developed in Europe and elsewhere is not consistent with this kind of principle. It used to be consistent, perhaps, but not in the age of migration, because many migrants are subject to the collective decisions that are taken in our national states, in the European Union, but they are either not represented or underrepresented in the institutions. So there are some recent developments in the theory of representation that can accommodate this puzzle, because it is possible also, it is being acknowledged that representation can work also through different mechanisms that are not electoral in nature. Well, I can skip this slide very briefly because I have not to convince you that the European Union is very relevant for the lives of migrants in Europe. The European Union has acquired several competencies in migration. European Parliament is a co-legislator now. And the second point I have not to convince you about is that migration as an issue has been recently at the center of the political agenda for many institutions of the European Union. So the democratic puzzles is at play here. We discuss migration, we take decisions about migrations. Migrants are not always, their voice is not always included. But here, just to start our exploration in the data, I would like to show you that migration is not only important for the European Commission or for the European Council or for the Parliament as a whole, as an institution. It's become very important also for individual representatives, members of the European Parliament. And I will talk a bit more about this kind of data later on. But for the moment, just suffice to say that I'm looking at the parliamentary questions that are asked by members of the European Parliament, here from 1994 to 2024. And I'm looking at the content of the policy content of these questions. And you can see that while in the 90s, the most popular topics that were discussed in the European Parliament were agriculture and macroeconomics, gradually other issues came to the front, including migration. In the 90s, until the so-called refugee crisis, let's say, parliamentary questions concern migration in less than 5% of the cases. Then this proportion raised to almost 10% in the hottest period, 2015, 16, 17. Then this proportion decreased a bit, but still remained over 5%. So the issue has become more important to individual representatives as well. They work more on migration. They talk more about migration. However, not all parties are created equal in this regard. There are some parties for which migration is more important than the average. This trend, actually, this increasing trend, the importance of migration can be appreciated also for mainstream parties like the People's Party or the Socialists and Democrats. So you can see that the share of total questions asked by parliamentarians belonging to these parties has followed a similar trend than when compared to the aggregate trend. But there are some parties for which migration is even more important. And for instance, most prominently, the radical right, during the crisis, the refugee crisis, 15% of their questions, but in any case, more than 10% of their questions concern migration. But also the Greens and the left, with a slightly different temporal trend, actually. It's more recent for them. So we can already appreciate that migration has become more important as an issue for all members of European parliaments, but with partisan differences. Okay, some very brief explanation of the terminology I'm going to use. Substantive representation. As I told you, I'm trying to explore whether the descriptive representation of migrants increase the descriptive increase the substantive representation. For substantive representation, borrowing the term from Hannah Pitkin, I mean that the interests of a group, in this case, migrants, are represented substantively. Everybody, in principle, can be a substantive representative. Any member of parliament, being a migrant or not, can be a representative for migrants, as far as he or she further their interests. Descriptive representation is generally defined in this literature as the situation when the composition of an elected assembly mirrors the composition of the people in terms of politically salient characteristics. It's typical to talk about a descriptive representation of women, because women are always or almost always underrepresented in legislative assemblies. And we talk also of the descriptive representation of ethnic minorities, in this case, migrants. Descriptive representation has proved to be important for substantive representation for theoretical and empirical reasons, especially when society is divided along lines marked in which the groups, the relation between the groups are marked by distrust, sometimes historically developed distrust. However, contemporary theory introduced some complication of this picture. First of all, it is difficult to talk about social groups in general. Women are not a group, a cohesive group at least. Migrants are not a cohesive group. There are different identities, interests across economic, cultural, national, gender lines. Second complication that is introduced by the recent literature is that there is nothing like a chain belt transmission of priorities, and it's not that the represented, the people, have some preformed interest and identity and ask representatives to represent them. These identities, these interests, the boundaries that divide different social groups are co-constructed in the interaction between the representatives and the represented. So it is really important to look at these factors. So my research question is basically, as I told you, does the presence of members of European Parliament with a migratory background, sometimes I would refer to them as migrant MEPs, but I mean migratory background, which is more general. One could not have migrated herself or himself, but be son of migrants, for instance, and that would amount to have a migrant background. So does their presence in Parliament provide substantive representation for migrants in the European Union? And this could be, however, decomposed into more specific questions that take into account the complications I briefly mentioned. First of all, basically, I ask whether migrant MEPs address migration issues more often than their colleagues. This is a common strategy, and it is justified because to represent someone, you have to talk about the issues that interest someone. So talking about migration is a kind of precondition to represent migrants. There could be other issues, I agree, but that is a very important issue. Secondly, I would also like to ask what kind of representative claim they advance. How do they define migrants? How do they refer to their interests? What kind of representative claim do they launch to the public through their public discourse? In this case, parliamentary questions, basically. Well, there is here a little surprise for those who have read the paper, because this is not in the paper, because it just happened 10 days ago, so I have no time to include in the paper. But it's, I think, a precious example to show how the interest of migrants could be defined different ways, and how a migratory background could play in different ways. This example is drawn from Shabana Mahmood, who's Home Secretary, UK Home Secretary, and just 10 days ago, she wrote an article for The Guardian explaining why and how she would like to reform the asylum system in the UK in a restrictive way. So let's say curbing the rights of asylum seekers. And she justified this measure for different reasons. First of all, she declared to speak as child of migrants, because she's born in Birmingham, but her family is of Pakistani descent, is Pakistani origin. So she's the child of migrants, and she specified that. And she also said that reforming the asylum system was necessary to reduce illegal immigration in the UK, and this, securing the borders, would be good for people looking like me. So she's launching a representative claim, actually, to the internal community of people with migrant origins in the UK, not all the migrants, of course. And I think it's very good example to show why it is important to go beyond issue attention, let's say. The data on which I base my analysis, data is derived from a research project, the UQuest project. I work on this project together with Marcello Caramia from the University of Catania. We gathered and categorized according to their policy content all the questions for written answer asked in the European Parliament between 1994 and 2024, so 30 years, lots of questions. And we categorized them in 20 major topics of the comparative agenda coding scheme. Plus, we also integrated all the information about members of the European Parliaments, integrating different sources to build a dataset, a comprehensive dataset with personal political characteristics of those MPs. Methods. We present some descriptive analysis of the content of the questions asked by members of the European Parliament, analysis of the committee membership of members of the European Parliament, and some regression analysis, plus some qualitative analysis also. So it's a very dense, sorry. First of all, I focus only on the last two concluded terms of the European Parliament, the 8th and the 9th terms. And in these terms, the number of MEPs with a migratory background has increased from 20 to 30. So the descriptive representation of people with migrant origin has increased. This is a snapshot of the different parliamentary groups from which they are drawn. I will not spend many words on that. We can comment on this slide later. I would just like to save a bit of time for the discussion. The first, I think, interesting, or to me, very interesting actually, results is this one, the committee membership. Well, it has been shown by some solid research that members of the European Parliament are quite free to choose a committee, a standing committee in which to serve. The choice is, let's say, mediated by from the parliamentary group leadership. So one has to ask the parliamentary leader which kind of committee in which to serve, but research has shown that most of the times they can get the committee they like. So looking at the committee in which these members serve is a good proxy to measure their policy preferences or the interest in different issues. The LIBE committee is the Committee on Civil Liberties, Justice and Home Affairs. So it's the committee responsible for migration. And the overrepresentation of MEPs with a migrant background is astonishing. This is the blue bar compared with the red bar. So more than 20% of migrant MEPs serve in the LIBE committee compared with the 7% of members without a migratory background. So members with a migratory background want to deal with migration more, on average, more than usual. Another committee in which they are overrepresented is the culture and education. They are also overrepresented in the DEVE committee, the Committee on Development, and they are severely underrepresented in the committee dealing with economic and monetary affairs. That's the basic situation. When looking at the content of the questions, the parliamentary questions they ask, well, sorry, here they are referred as minority versus non-minority. You have to read migrant versus non-migrant background. It's a kind of typo. Migration, well, members with the migratory background, for them, more than 20% of their questions deal with migration, compared with about 7% of questions for MEPs without a migratory background. So this is a kind of smoking gun. They are much more interested in migration. But this is just descriptive analysis. I also test this relation with in a regression analysis framework. I guess I can skip the technicalities here, but my dependent variable is the number of questions they ask on migration. My independent variable is whether they have a migratory background or not, whether they are member of the LIBE committee or not, and their party group, the party group they are member of, because we already know that parties can make a difference. I control also for the total number of questions they ask, because we know that members of parliament differ widely in their activism in parliamentary questioning. So there are some very active questionnaires and some who don't like the tool. The results, I have also some graphical results just to make it clearer, are quite interesting, actually, because basically all the relation is mediated by committee membership. So on average, members with a migratory background ask much more questions on migration because they are disproportionately members of the LIBE committee. Once you take into account committee membership and their party, which is a measure of their ideology, perhaps, then there is no longer a clear relation between their background and the number of questions they ask. Yes, the coefficients tell us that they still ask 30% about more questions on migration, but the relation is not statistically significant because there is a huge variation. This graph shows the predicted number of questions on migration based on committee membership, member of the LIBE committee versus not member of the LIBE committee. And it is quite clear that this is the single most important predictor. And this is instead the impact of parties, identity and democracy. So the right-wing party, the radical right in the European Parliament, ask much more questions on average on migration than basically the liberal, the People's Party, the conservatives, the socialists also. They are statistically not distinguishable from the left. The two brackets overlap. But I wanted to know something more. All these questions address different aspects of migration. So I asked myself whether MEPs with the migrant background talk about migration differently, of different aspects of migration. So I applied an unsupervised learning technique, a topic model, to make finer arguments, topics emerge, and I discovered 5 topics, 5 subtopics, let's say, that are very much discussed: border control, AIDS, refugees situation, illegal migration. Being of a migratory background does not make any difference. It's party that make a difference again. So finally, I engaged in a bit of more qualitative analysis, which is the less developed part of the paper so far. I just focused on the migrant MEPs who are more active in questioning, so for which I could analyze a good number of textual documents. And I came out with three female legislators, Özlem Demirel, Rashida Dati, and Asita Kenko. These are the most active questioners in terms of migration. And it was feasible to read all these questions, so I did that, and I summarized just what I discovered. Özlem Demirel, she was born in Turkey from a Kurdish family. She was forced to flee in Germany when she was 5. So she has been a refugee, or her father had been a refugee, and the family with him. She was elected in the European Parliament in 2019 in Germany for the left. And most of their questions focus on Frontex. And they are very descriptive, the question. They are very information seeking, but then she uses the information she gets to criticize openly Frontex and the securitization and militarization of EU external borders. And she's really, really critical, as you can read, against the dirty deals with autocrats and militias and so on. So that's a very different story for both Rachida Dati, who's a high-profile French politician, and Asita Kenku, who are member of the People's Party in one case, and the conservative group in the other case. Both these legislators focus very much on reducing irregular and illegal migration, although they both frame this necessity in terms, more or less, with more or less emphasis in terms of saving the lives of those who try to cross the Mediterranean Sea. So, in conclusion, this tour proved in a way that MEPs with a migratory background are, on average, much more interested in migration than MEPs without a migratory background. This is very clear looking at their membership in the Libe Committee. But still, there are a good number of MEPs with a migratory background who focus on very different things and don't consider themselves as representatives of the migrants, or who want to distance themselves from the issue. But still, there is an overrepresentation of MEPs with the migratory background among those who are actively interested in migration. But migration is a polarizing issue. So the stance of MEPs depends very much on their party membership. Discursively, personal background and the history, the story of those MEPs is very important for them to frame their attention to migration, their position to migration. And by looking at their questions, we can surely say that the interest of migrants can be defined differently, because the identity of the migrants that are represented are really different. 10 seconds to conclude, because there is a personal story also behind this my interest in this topic. This presentation, this work is dedicated to the memory of my immigrant ancestors, because my great-grandfather migrated from a little village in southern Italy to the US, just as his father. And of course, their story, their sacrifices, their bitter memories, in some cases, contributed to my life, my choices, and my interests. So this is dedicated to them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for the presentation, Federico, and also a very clear set of conclusions. We are now going to open it up for questions from all of you, both in the room and online. I see there's a hand. I don't see it from here, but I do see from here. Okay, yes, I see it now. Okay, yes, Tina, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, yeah.
Great. So thank you for this really fascinating presentation. I would love to get more in some of the details. So I authored the NR report that is cited in the paper, and I would be really happy to exchange more details on the data, etc. But one main question that I have is that my understanding of the data that you're presenting is that you're using migratory background as kind of a synonym of non-EU descendants. So of what I use in the report is basically racialized, which was an ongoing conversation with the European Network Against Racism. And so I also, it has not been published, but I also have data for the 10th mandate, the ongoing one. And so, for example, somebody like Sandro Gozzi, who is an Italian citizen who does not have French citizenship, but was elected in the current European Parliament for France. Would you consider this MEP as somebody with a migratory background? Because I think that it creates a very different set of expectations and of questions that we ask, whether we're using migratory background as a synonym for non-white, in fact. So I mean, I have so many curiosities and questions. I really look forward to seeing this work moving forward, and I would be also very happy to just set up a talk and learn more about it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's collect two more questions for this first round. Okay, Martin, please.
Yeah, thank you. This was really interesting, and apologies, I have not read the paper. Perhaps the answers are in the paper, but can you just explain again? So the conclusions, I suppose, were phrased in general terms, but then when you were starting out, you said you were interested in analyzing whether there's a difference in how many questions are being asked on immigration, and then you looked at committee membership. But I suppose in one way, it's obvious, right, that the people who are selecting into particular committees are going to ask more questions about the topic that's relevant to the committee. So I'm just wondering, I tried to ask myself, what you were controlling for committee membership, but by controlling for committee membership, you already mask the fact that the people who want to, they want to ask more questions, right? So that result that you get just says, within the LIBE committee, for example, is there an additional effect, right? So just when you take everything together, if you could say a little bit more about, whether you should control or not for committee membership in asking the more general question. And the second, briefly, so when you look at the topics and what questions are being asked, what's the assumption of what is in the interest of the people who are being represented? Who are these MEPs with migrant background supposed to represent? So if somebody asks a border question, do you interpret that as representing an interest or not? Because I suppose it could go either way, right? Border control could could or could not represent the interests of existing migrants. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, final question for this round.
Thanks, Federico. I would I have the same kind of issues that Tina mentioned about migratory background, which seemed to me to refer to kind of racialized minorities, people who from outside of Europe. Would somebody who moved from Sweden to Denmark as a mobile EU citizen be evident within the analysis? I think that will be important to clear that up. And obviously you've got then there's a kind of a line between the kind of people of a migratory background and of course people who are EU citizens. So I think it'd be very important to clarify what you're referring to. I think that I was interested about the thing about committees, because committee membership seems to be, I mean, Martin's picked up a little bit already, but I genuinely do not know, are people choosing their committees or are they assigned to committees? And if they're assigned to committees, are we seeing in effect that people of migratory background are kind of being kind of pushed into a committee where it's assumed that's the committee for people of migratory background? What is the process here which underpins this committee assignment? Because I would assume that you're on a committee because you have some specialized expertise. But there must be, what is the, how does the process work? And are committees, does committee membership and the kind of policy preferences evident there, does it differ substantially from the overall parliament itself? Are we seeing, so how do we understand the relationship between membership committees and the overall kind of composition of the parliament in terms of the kind of preferences of the members that you're focusing on? So I'm very interested in the committee. This point about committee seems very important to your analysis. I was also thought maybe you focus on a range of very clear migration issues. Do you focus all on integration issues around, because maybe they're not the business of the Labour committee, but I would imagine that people who are of migratory background might also be interested in issues that could relate to integration. And a final thing, so my first ever job was on a parliamentary candidate selection project, and recruitment and selection are fundamental pathways to the representative processes that you're focusing on. Are any of these parties or groups interested or doing anything to enhance the representation of people with migratory background? How do we understand that? Is it in any sense a priority as they construct their lists or of candidates?
Okay, thank you. Back to you, Federico. Then we'll go for a second round after.
Okay, so thanks for your questions. Then I will start with the first and last question from Tina Magazzini and Andrew, because they are quite similar. So first of all, I struggled a bit with this. In the paper, I defined migratory background as non-European migratory backgrounds. So it's not synonymous with non-white, because there is also Russian, for instance. But still, it's a slippery slope. I think it's quite difficult. More, I guess, in theory than in practice, once you exclude Sandro Gozzi and examples like that, so people who are citizens, already European citizens, and migrate to another European country, I focus on extra-EU migrant background. But most of the arguments I have advanced, the experience of discrimination, for instance, they apply more to racialized minorities. There is an overlap between the two, but it's not the same thing. But I still want to look at migration, so the regulation of migration. So thank you for pointing this out. I know this is something I have to elaborate a bit better, but there is no, I think, an easy way out from this because they are related. And if I go for the study of racialized minorities, then not all racialized minorities have an experience of migration. So the topics could be of interest, could be really different. For instance, and here we go, it could be more on the integration and the rights and the discrimination, and less on the regulation of migration. So I'll go to another question by Andrew, the integration issues. Well, when I tried to run an unsupervised technique to let topics emerge from the questions, I really hoped that there was something on integration, but that would have played really nicely for the paper. But I did not find that with 5 topics. I even went to a model with 10 different topics, and still I could not find parliamentary questions on the integration of migrants. Perhaps because it is something that is more discussed at the national level. I don't know. I could try even different approaches, but I have the impression that I'm winnowing all these questions for something that is not there. I will still keep doing that. For Martin, committee membership, and also for Andrew as well. As far as I know, I've not interviewed members of the European Parliament. I've read the literature. And committee assignment is a process that is very different in different contexts. So there are some contexts in which it's mainly the party which decides, at least for the less senior members of the parliament. The most senior member of the parliament usually manage to get the committee they like. The case of the European Parliament, by looking at the literature I have reviewed, seems like a case in which most of MEPs, most of the time, can get the committee. They can be assigned to the committee they like. So it's a I interpret it as a proxy of their interest. Why did I control for committee membership? Well, controlling for committee membership was a way to see whether all the relation that exists between being interested in migration and having a migratory background, all of that relation was mediated by committee membership, or committee membership was only one piece of the puzzle. So basically, I could not find a difference between having a migratory background or not having a migratory background between members of the Libe committee and not members of the committee or the Libe committee. So members of the Libe committee are much more similar than other members. If I discovered that there was also an independent effect of being member of having a migratory background, that would have reinforced the claim that substantive and descriptive representation are related in the European Parliament. But still, finding that all the relation is mediated by committee membership does not disrupt the argument, because committee membership is a function of their interest. I don't know whether I have still other questions. I think I'm good.
Okay, thank you. So let's go for a second round. We start from the room here, and then we have I see two more people online. So Lorenzo, would you like to go next?
Thanks. I'm Lorenzo. I work at Lorenzo Weekly. I work at the Migration Policy Center. I find this a very good and very interesting project, and I really mean it. I'm not saying it. It's just to prepare for some criticisms. Like Tina and Andrew, I'm not convinced about what does it mean to have a migrant background. Even yourself, drawing on the example of the final slide and the personal history, have a migrant background in your family in a way. And more generally, I don't fully understand why we should care about the representation of migrants by people with a migratory background in the European Parliament. I don't understand the mechanism there. And you explain it in the first part of the paper and the presentation on theories on representative democracy and representation of different groups. But I was not fully convinced precisely because of your choice of a category that is very specific. So you exclude people who, as mentioned, are born in different European countries and represent a different constituency. This might also be due to the fact that when I look at the working of the European Parliament, a lot of the discussions on migration that I follow are not pushed forward by people who have a migratory background in the sense that you capture. Perhaps that's due to my very specific positioning as an Italian. Many of the people who push on migration issues from Italy don't have a migration background. I'm thinking of Pietro Bartolo before, I'm thinking of Mimmo Lucano now. And from outside of Italy, of course, Tineke Strick, and before Andrew Duff. Perhaps, and so this is my question or comment, this is because these people are particularly active organizing events around migration at the European Parliament and inviting groups of civil society, which is very different from just asking questions within the Parliament. So I wonder whether there is also a way to capture that, the frequency of events where people organize, where they can also invite other organizations that work on the topic. This is one comment. The other comment is I was perhaps a bit surprised because the title of your presentation is about the advocacy, and I don't see any advocacy here. I wonder whether this is just about interest or scrutiny around very different issues. And finally, just for the presentation, I would find it interesting to see from which countries these people come from, so in which constituencies they are elected. I have more comments, but I'm going to send them to you in writing, or we can chat at the end of these. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you. We still have four questions to go, so I will ask you to please keep your comments brief. Please, yes, you go ahead.
Hi, I'm Daniel Kowarek from the School of Transnational Governance down the hill. I have two questions. The first, especially when you were showing your regression models, I was wondering if this is all a composition effect for urban MEPs. That is, all the topic distribution, all the committees you show, like interest in human rights, disinterest in agriculture, this is something I would expect from any urban MEP coming from a metropolitan area or a capital. So I was wondering whether you could actually, what happens if you add the population to any of these models? Because to me, it seems even if you're an MEP without any migratory background, you even have an electoral incentive, right? To do substantive representation for people with migratory backgrounds. And that is more likely if you are in a very urban, large population area. And the second is just a bit of a follow-up on all the, so to say, how you operationalize the migratory background part. So you said extra EU, right? Great. So I was wondering that in the eastern neighborhood of Europe, borders move as often, if not more, than people actually. So I was wondering whether you can somehow separate it from people who ended up being diaspora because of border changes, but they are in fact not people with migratory backgrounds, right? They are people who found themselves on the other side of the border when borders were redrawn, say in Poland, in Hungary, Serbia, Ukraine, etc. If anything, this probably only like attenuates or underestimates your effect. So it's not a worry, but I guess it would be good to show how these people are not really what you're going after conceptually.
Thank you. Now we have Ettore online. Please, Ettore.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Contrary to Ettore Recchi, part-time professor at MPC, contrary to Lorenzo, I really sympathize with these kind of studies. Actually, anecdotically, my first international journal article 30 years ago was about the background of Italian MPs. And yeah, one lesson I learned from your study is that MPs with migratory background are more used as tokens by parties than using parties as platforms to advance migration or defend migration interests. But one thing that could be useful, and I didn't see in your presentation, just to question this possible interpretation, is the propensity of MPs with migratory background to team up together across party lines. So if you have votes, it might be the case that this particular section of MPs with similar backgrounds end up crossing the party lines to vote together. And that may show some emerging or latent common interest that cannot be seen by the kind of analysis that you have carried out so far.
Thank you. Now, Amira and then Tina. Amira, you have the floor. No, okay, so that's Tina. This was a false hand.
Yes, so sorry. I'll be brief. Just a quick follow-up. So basically, if I understand correctly, what you and I sympathize with the struggle of defining categories, but it's not only about the fact that you define migratory background as extra EU, but it's extra EU from the global north. So basically you're excluding, for example, there are a number of MEPs from Canada or from the US, and those are not in the study. And I see that you have included Roma MEPs, which I think, we did that in the study for ENAR because they are a racialized category. But I think that if we're talking of migratory status, then they really should not belong in the same framework, because none of the 4 MEPs in the 8th or in the 9th mandate have any kind of migratory background. And just I think something that Andrew was pointing out, because in order to be elected, you need to be a citizen, with the exception of Portugal, in which Brazilians can also be elected, then the barrier is really important. And I was wondering if you find something different after Brexit. So if you have looked at what happens after the one country that basically had the most MEPs with migratory background left the EU. And finally, just a suggestion on whether you have looked beyond committees to the intergroups, because I think that in particularly ARDI, so the anti-racism and diversity intergroup, of course, it doesn't carry the same kind of political weight that committees do, but I have some data on this, and I think it actually shows quite a few interesting dynamics. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Back to you, Federico.
Yeah,
I think.
hello.
Yeah.
Yes,
sorry, Amira. Yes.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much for this useful presentation. I think you tried to pull out some kind of very important issues. My comments actually is that while you are saying that you use advocacy, I don't know how, in terms of the methodology, how you use these issues of social digital media in the advocacy programs for your topic. The other thing is that I recommend actually, if further research is done in this area, particularly using a kind of a comparative research between 3 or 4 countries, EU countries, that to show the successful stories of some countries who are succeeding in this issue of integrating the migratory generations in the parliament, with other countries who are maybe are not really succeed in this issue, and to show the indicators and the factors that may be encouraging and other factors that hinder the issue. Is it an issue of a legal side, or is it just an issue of discrimination, social, cultural, or it is other issues? Because some countries like the UK, of course, they were quite successful in this issue of how to integrate the migratory background in the parliament, and we have a real examples implemented in the previous years. So this is just I would like to add an issue, but still I feel that the methodology used by the presenter is still, it needs some kind of elaboration. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Back to you, Federico. We are already over time, so you have the very tough job of addressing all these questions concisely, I guess. Thank you.
I won't, because it would be impossible. It's difficult even to do some cherry picking. I would rather thank you very much for your questions, and it's been incredibly useful to have this conversation with you. I've noted different things, but I also encourage you to drop me an email. I will try to reach for some of you as well, because I think they're really good suggestions and criticism to make this piece of research stronger. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Federico. Thanks again for joining us, and thanks to all of you for contributing so actively in the discussion. Thank you very much. Have a good lunch. Bye-bye.